Hi, I'm Ben from thePinkLens.com and welcome to the second video of my history of LGBT cinema. Last time I took you through the 1960s and the period that led up to Stonewall and the decriminalisation of homosexuality in the US and the UK. Today we're looking at the 70s, the period of time in which the gay community was finding its feet. It's 1970. The Stonewall riots have led to the decriminalisation of homosexuality in the USA. It's been legal in the UK for 3 years, and Boys in the Band is currently in the cinema. This situational comedy depicts the lives, loves and struggles of a group of wholly gay men, and what's striking now, looking back on it, is just how similar they were then to the way that we behave today. Despite being released in the year after Stonewall, already there are the stereotypes of the grinder tribes of today. The beefcake, the catty queen, and the gay man who is damaged by his past rejections.
You remind me of an old maid school teacher.
You remind me of a chicken wing.
I'm sure you meant that as a compliment.
And besides, I want to get to the bars by midnight.
He's a class act all the way around.
What do you mean get to the bars? Sweetie, I paid you for the whole evening, remember?
Oh, I hurt my back doing my exercises, and I want to get to bed early today.
In the years that followed Stonewall, the LGBT community would go down two main paths. The first was to continue to fight for their freedoms, and the second was to wholly take advantage of the freedoms that they already had. Queer cinema would reflect more of the latter, but as people were attending the very first Pride marches and coming out of the closet in their droves, queer cinema reflected their continuing struggle. After the huge success of Love Story in 1970, a gay version of the film emerged in 1974 called A Very Natural Thing, which went so far as to paraphrase the dialogue from the original film and, despite being panned by critics, was the first gay film to get a multiplex release across the US. Meanwhile, in the UK, the huge success of The Naked Civil Servant, the biopic of notorious society figure Quentin Crisp, saw John Hurt win a BAFTA in 1975 for the hugely popular role that depicted the struggles Crisp had in the years before he could legally be gay and express who he was.
I dream of a great dark man, a real man, enormously strong, enormously virile, whose love I shall win. I know that my dream is doomed to disappointment. If I succeed, I fail. If I win the love of a man, he cannot be a real man, and the more feminine I make myself to attract a real man, the less will a real man be attracted by me.
In the UK, where camp figures such as Kenneth Williams and Frankie Howard had been celebrated but disconnected from their sexuality, this sexualisation of camp figures was a huge step. Another person who was protesting against the system was John Waters. With his now iconic Pink Flamingos debuting in 1972, his collaborations with drag star Divine and unique brand of gross-out comedy were deliberately provocative. For the next 2 decades, Waters would be courting controversy with films that sat somewhere between kitsch and extreme bad taste.
Connie and Raymond Marble, you have breathed your last breath. You have sighed your last sigh.
Similarly, Fellini and Pasolini in Italy were creating films that knowingly pushed boundaries. Satyricon, The Canterbury Tales, Arabian Nights, and most controversially, Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, in which a group of fascists round up a group of nubile boys and girls and subject them to 120 days of physical torture. For many, these kinds of depictions of LGBT people on screen was counterproductive. How were they meant to make the LGBT lifestyle more palatable for non-LGBT people if queer culture was flagrantly doing everything that it could to be contentious? The Rocky Horror Picture Show portrayed transvestism as something dark and sexualised. Rainer Werner Fassbinder released unsettling character dramas like The Bitter Tears of Petra Van Kant. Derek Jarman embraced blasphemous eroticism in Sebastian and punk counterculture in Jubilee. And all the while, gay men are identifying more and more with hypermasculinity, holding Tom of Finland as probably their biggest gay icon of the 1970s. And with gay pornography now legal, gay erotica is less artistic and more intended simply for titillation, with only the works of Peter de Rome and Pink Narcissus being remembered for that aesthetic merit. While all of these films are being made on the art house scene, what about the mainstream? Well, in 1978, France produced La Cage aux Folles, a high camp farce that revolved around a gay couple and their son who wants to introduce his parents to his fiance's ultra-conservative family. With one of his dads so camp that he couldn't possibly be mistaken for heterosexual, they decide it's better for him to masquerade as a woman instead, after which much farcical hilarity ensues. The film was a massive commercial success both at home and abroad, spawned a musical stage show, and would eventually be remade in Hollywood as The Birdcage. Italy also saw LGBT characters filtering into its mainstream, with films like A Special Day and Conversation Piece becoming big international hits abroad. But what about what was going on in Hollywood? With the Hays Code officially lifted in 1968, US cinema was veering away from melodramatic glamour and more toward gritty realism. In 1975, Al Pacino starred in Dog Day Afternoon, a true story about a bank robbery that turned sour. As part of the negotiations with police, his wife is brought in to assist them, except his wife is a transgender woman, and it transpires that his motive for robbing the bank is to fund her sex reassignment surgery.
Well, I couldn't explain the things I did. So I went to a psychiatrist who told me that I was a woman trapped in a man's body.
In 1978, Midnight Express depicted a man imprisoned in Turkey for drug smuggling, and while there, engaged in same-sex sexual activity in prison. Both these films received awards attention, but not as much as Cabaret in 1972, which featured gay and bisexual characters and, had it been released any other year, probably would have won Best Picture at the Oscars. But unfortunately, it was released in the same year as The Godfather, so it missed out. By the end of the 70s, LGBT people were being seen on screen openly for the very first time. And while not all of these depictions were wholly positive, the tide had definitely turned. LGBT people were experiencing sexual liberation. You only have to watch the documentary Gay Sex in the 70s to see how people were having their cake, eating it too, then going to the candy shop and eating everything within sight. Soho had become a regular haunt for gay men. San Francisco was a gay mecca with the rise of Harvey Milk to public office. Fire Island was the gay paradise on Earth. By the end of the decade, everything seemed to be going so brilliantly for LGBT people, but then, in 1980, a now notorious film named Cruising was released. In it, Al Pacino starred as a police detective enlisted to try and catch a serial killer targeting the gay leather scene. The excesses of what appears on screen as a debauched and depraved world was reminiscent of pre-Stonewall attitudes to LGBT people.
There's just stuff going down. I don't think I can deal with it.
But while protesters objected vehemently to the movie and the message that it held, it marked the end of the halcyon days of the 70s, because it wouldn't be very long before everything changed for the LGBT community and the public's attitude toward them, with the arrival of a mysterious disease which would later become known as AIDS. That marks the end of this second period of LGBT cinema history. Make sure that you tune in next time when I'll be talking to you about film in the 1980s and LGBT cinema during the time of AIDS. Thanks for watching, and make sure that you go to www.thepinklens.com for all your news, reviews and LGBT cinema related content that you could ever need. Until next time, folks.